plan intervention criteria and thresholds for nationally significant infrastructure projects. The consultation runs for 8 weeks until the 24th of September. The covering report seeks to set out the implications of the proposed reforms for North Northamptonshire, and alongside a proposed response to the consultation that's provided at Appendix A. And as you'll have seen, there's more than 100 questions within the consultation. So what we've tried to do is focus on the key implications for North Northamptonshire and our policy work within the report. The response at Appendix A, we've had really good input from services across the council. So just like to place on record my thanks for that. And that includes housing strategy, thanks to Des, public health, transport planning, developer contributions, to name a few. And we've also incorporated previous feedback that you have provided through the EAP to consultations on planning reform under the previous government. As para 2.3 of the report sets out, we will take on board feedback from yourselves, any other discussions or issues that we become aware of from other organisations. I'm going to a planning advisory service workshop on the MPPF on Monday, for example, and we're aware that responses are starting to be published. So the Town and Country Planning Association published an interim response yesterday in advance of a full response, and they're flagging concerns that the MPPF doesn't go far enough in relation to climate change and public health. So those kind of issues, there is the opportunity to further refine the response, which will be submitted with the agreement by the executive member in consultation with the Executive Director for Place and Economy, and we will make sure it's submitted by 11:45 on the 24th of September. So hopefully before that, but that's the process. As the Chair said, you'll be well aware of there's been a huge number of consultations about planning reform and the MPPF over the last few years, and that's reflected in 4.1 of the report. Alongside the consultation, the Deputy Prime Minister wrote to local authorities on the 30th of July, and that letter is set out at Appendix C. And I think the commentary in the sort of planning press is that the letter signals the Deputy Prime Minister's resolve in moving forward with the reforms set out in the MPPF, and encourages local authorities to deliver local plans in line with it. And it also highlights her intention to use intervention powers where delivery of development is not at the level it should be. So as the report sets out, we feel as a council that we are well placed to respond to the package of reforms, but there are obviously issues and implications and concerns of some elements that we want to talk through. So I think it's safe to say, as the introduction to the consultation is set out in 4.4 of the report, that it's a pro-growth package of reforms. I think that's pretty clear in the introduction to the consultation, where the government makes clear that sustained economic growth is what they believe the only route to improving prosperity. And I think in Chapter 2 of the consultation, which is set out in para 4.6 of the report, the policy objectives are very sort of growth focused. In terms of the implementation of the proposed reforms, it's set out in the consultation in the covering report that the government is saying that they will respond to the consultation and publish the MPPF revisions before the end of the year so that changes can take effect. So I think that's clear that they're clear on wanting to deliver these reforms and bring them forward. So obviously we want to talk through the response and the implications, but what I think we feel as officers is that the clarity that the MPPF gives is welcome, and the clarity on on the timetable for implementations is welcome, because, like I've just said, there's been so many changes to the NPPF and so much uncertainty with planning reform that at least if we get a package of measures set out, we know what we're working towards through policy, housing strategy, development management, etc. So in terms of some of the key implications, Chapter 3 of the consultation, planning for the homes we need, the Chair touched on the previous government's changes to the NPPF that came into effect in December 2023, and what the consultation proposes to do is essentially reverse all of those. So where it's proposing to remove reference to the standard method for housing needs being an advisory starting point, and the emphasis of the consultation is very much that local authorities should meet local housing need and that you should use the standard method. It's pretty clear on that. As 4.11 of the report sets out, we'd always been working towards meeting local housing need, and in previous consultations had sort of emphasised that more alternative methods can bring greater uncertainty. So I think in terms of implications, obviously the housing number side of things is going to be key, but we were working to meet our local housing need already. There are, in Chapter 3 also, 4.16 of the report sets out that the document changes the presumption in favour of sustainable development by clarifying what policies are most important in the assessment of schemes, and that those changes seek to set out that policies that might be rendered out of date by the presumption in favour of sustainable development will relate to the supply of land. There's also clarification to include the location and design of development and secure and affordable homes, and I think we're supportive of those changes. As part of the package of reforms to drive house building, 4.21 onwards of Chapter 3 of the Covering Report, a lot of the changes regarding housing land supply, they are proposed to be reversed. So authorities need to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply against the new standard method. References to passed over supply are proposed to be removed. The ability for local authorities to fix their housing land supply through annual position statements has been removed. In terms of the implications, as the JCS is over 5 years old, despite the previous reforms, we've been required to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply anyway, so that its reinstatement is largely irrelevant in that context. We did support previous oversupply being taken account of, so we've set that out in the consultation response, and we previously supported the removal of the 5% buffer that's proposed to be reinstated. So the key issue, as the report discusses a lot, is going to be maintaining 5-year housing land supply against the higher numbers in the standard method. So I'm just moving down on my laptop. Chapter 4, the new standard method for assessing housing needs. That's one of the biggest changes of the reforms, really. And 4.35 to onwards explains the changes to the standard method, replacing the current 4-step model with a 2-step approach. And I suppose the main thing to highlight is that instead of population-based model, it uses a housing stock model. As you'll see in 4.38, the proposed new methodology reduces the need figure for London but increases the targets across all other regions, and there's a spreadsheet, and I've got the spreadsheet, so if anyone's interested in adjoining authorities, or just please let me know. So in terms of the implications of the reforms for North Northamptonshire, I mean, the report acknowledges at para 4.39 that there are different methodologies for calculating local housing need. Some authorities have strongly objected to the proposed methodology. The Planning Officers Society have expressed concern about the move away from household projections-based approach. I think there's always, whatever method uses, there are always some authorities that come out better and other authorities that come out worse. And I think it's just worth emphasising that. I mean, what the implications are clear on, though, is that the higher housing numbers, but it's still essential that the government facilitates the delivery of high quality development and funding through the funding of infrastructure provision, and that's explained at 4.41 to 4.42 of the report. And what we're proposing to set out in the consultation response is to emphasise the importance of infrastructure funding that was set out in the open letter from the leader of the council, and that's in 4.41 of the report, and is also in the response at the appendix. I mean, we're all aware, as 4.42 of the report sets out, that North Northamptonshire has consistently been a growth area for over 20 years. Members have been, positive of sustainable growth, and we've committed to this through plan making and development management. We've got an extensive supply of committed housing and employment sites, so we can deliver and meet the aspirations that the consultation sets out, but continued government support is essential in continuing this. There's obviously the issue that we've previously raised regarding wages as well, and that's set out in the consultation response to the relevant question. In terms of the numbers, the revised standard method increases the local housing need for North Northamptonshire from 1,874 dwellings per annum, which is the numbers in our housing and economic needs assessment, to 2,064 dwellings per annum. We obviously measure housing land supply against local housing need due to the age of the Joint Core Strategy. Based on the 22-23 monitoring years, we have got 6.07 years housing land supply with no buffer, and a 5.78 years housing land supply with a 5% buffer, but obviously that is subject to change when the newest completion figures are available. So, as discussed in the report, the implications of the higher housing numbers could mean that we are in a more vulnerable short-term position regarding housing land supply and the housing delivery test. I think it's worth stressing that the consultation document acknowledges that more local authorities will be affected by the higher housing numbers and be brought into the presumption in favour of sustainable development. So, touched on infrastructure funding, but unlocking the deliverability of the garden communities and other stalled sites is going to be absolutely critical. In terms of the development of the North Northamptonshire local plan, we're looking at a sort of increased housing need of 3,800 dwellings, which we'll need to plan for through the plan as it's developed. In terms of implications, we also need to consider what updates we might need to do to our evidence base, including the housing and economic needs assessment. The standard method also increases the housing numbers for adjoining authorities to North Northamptonshire, I think for pretty much all authorities other than Bedford. So this could increase pressure through the duty to cooperate to take unmet need, although that hasn't been identified as an issue yet. Moving swiftly on.
Before you do, just before you do, Steve, you had a question or comment?
Yes, Chair. One, give Simon a break for a second. He's famously trying to catch after Richard Palmer.
This is his brief truncated. This is his brief and truncated introduction.
I just wanted to emphasise some of those.
Anyway, do go on.
Yeah, and Chair, I mean, I appreciate you may want to leave the debate to the end, but I mean, just picking up some bit as we're going along just helps with the workshop. And it's just a great understanding, Simon, of the of how the in answer to question 15, because so you've already gone past all this, but in relation to the differences in populations, I don't really understand that paragraph in relation to switching to the stable baseline on how the stock misses the different populations in relation to those changes. Yeah. And just before we move too far away from that, I just wanted
Sue will come in and then I'll...
So the methodology at the moment is based on population projections, so that effectively takes account of what type of population you have, because obviously if you have a much younger population, then the birth rates are likely to be higher, which means that you end up with a higher housing requirement. This new method is proposing to simplify that by just basing it on existing stock. So they just basically count how many houses you've already got, put an uplift of 0.8%, and then you have an affordability ratio on that. So the benefits of that is that it's much simpler, because there's always arguments about how the population projections are done. And you always end up with, that's why we're still at the moment using the 2014 housing population projections, because the population projections since then have been highly debated, and statisticians will argue about, oh, well, you factored this in wrong, and you factored household formation size wrong, and all those kind of things. So I think what they're trying to do is simplify the process by saying, okay, we'll just base it on how many houses have you got, you should be having an additional proportion of those. The disadvantage is, of course, that everybody is treated the same, and some areas won't need as many houses as others because their household formation rates aren't the same. So, yeah, pros and cons. Does that answer the question? A bit.
Please.
Yes, it did, but I just wanted to come back on that. I mean, and then as you say, there'd be different views on that. I mean, the last what I remember questioning, because I've always questioned it, some of the data in relation to the modelling, because the modelling is questionable on how they come up with the numbers anyway. So you're absolutely right in that respect. What I would say is, just personally, I get the opening point and the government's wish to get Britain building again, or get us building again, but in relation to what you're saying, I do recall, Chair, the huge amount of issue we had in East Northants with lack of bungalows and a lack of housing for older people. Now, I remember previously that we are actually an ageing council area. Well, Northamptonshire is an ageing council area. So, personally, on the back of your response there, I'm not sure this change, Chair, is necessarily going to help Northants in relation to trying to deliver what in the past, and we haven't solved it in the last 5 years, is the sheer lack of downsizing and bungalows. If they're just building on what we've got already, and what we've got already is not enough, then how are we going to deliver on the future for the downsizing and future generations?
Well, I think...
can come back on that.
Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
So basically the standard methodology only gives you the overall number.
Yeah.
So you then have to do your own local evidence through the HENA, which is what we've already done, which is the information that you then use in your local plan to decide how you want to split that up and what types. So that would still remain exactly the same.
So it's on a household projection. You can then use the data that provides and apply your own local evidence base, which can take into account things like ageing population, perhaps aspiration, perhaps other more locally identifiable needs.
All of that would be exactly the same.
Right, no, thank you.
This is just that the starting point is the overall
numbers. The overall, Okay, thank you. No, that's really quite helpful. Okay. Simon,
thanks,
you
Councillor.
Good chance to get your breath back.
I've got the hints as well. You'll be pleased to know that there's not. I'll endeavour to rattle through.
No, honestly, you don't. You're doing. You're doing a good job, and it's actually very useful.
Just in terms of Chapter 6, talking about delivering affordable, well-designed homes and places, the government set out that then will not be implementing the infrastructure levy that was introduced in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, and as part of they'll be looking to improve the existing system of developer contributions. And speaking with Stacey and the developer contributions team, I think we're saying in the response that we'd welcome the opportunity to work with government to develop those proposals. A lot of proposed changes in relation to affordable housing, which we can talk through in the consultation response. The 4.54 of the report, the draft MPPF, it sets an expectation that housing needs assessments explicitly consider the needs of those requiring social rent. So there's a big push within the document on that sector. The requirement to deliver 10% of the total number of homes on major sites as affordable home ownership is proposed to be removed. And the government also proposes removing the requirement that a minimum of 25% of affordable housing units through developer contributions should be first homes. So they're quite major changes. And I think broadly we're supportive of those in the consultation response, although...
Yeah.
I disagree. I strongly disagree with that. House builders, why would we do that? House builders are still making a lot of money, and there is evidence that builders are still making profits by overcharging for new homes. A recent study by Brunel University highlighted that. We are here to represent not the builders, but our residents, and there is, the chair said, we hope there are sufficient residents willing to buy properties. Well, it's not willing to buy it, they've got to be able to buy it. And house prices are extremely high. We are becoming more increasingly diverse. We are one of the fastest growing, aren't we, counties of the country. I believe keeping the 10% affordable homes is extremely important. That's my view.
Just to clarify, that's 10% of homes as affordable home ownership products. It's not proposing to remove it as a target. It's affordable home ownership products. And I think as we set out on 4.60 of the report, that was impractical to enforce that requirement, and the revised wording in para 66 of the MPPF we feel will allow for local authorities to require an affordable housing mix which is evidenced by local needs. It's not proposing to remove affordable housing targets, it's just the product. So we feel that will sort of aid the delivery of types that meet our local need.
So just to explain that in a bit more detail, so at the moment, you know that our local plan has a target of 40% affordable housing, okay? So at the moment, the MPPF requires 10% of that to be home ownership, regardless of what our local needs are. So our evidence base is showing that we have a lot of need for rented properties, but the requirement at the moment is we still have to provide for the home ownership. This would allow us, by removing that national requirement for 10%, would enable us to set our own local targets, looking at our own local evidence to say, right, of the affordable housing, we need this amount of social rent, this amount of affordable rent, this amount of shared ownership, this amount of first homes, and that would then be a local decision. So it's removing a national target for a very specific type of affordable housing, not all affordable housing.
So, if I may, again, it almost reflects what you were talking about with the household allocation, the household methodology. It puts the onus of affordable housing back onto the local evidence base and locally assessed need.
Yes.
And we are still at liberty in our local plan to have a figure of affordable housing that we can hold developers to within our own local development framework.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you would also be able to, in your local plan, specify the type of affordable housing based on your local need. So that would be in terms of tenure type and in terms of size and in terms of types of need for specialist housing and all of those kind of things. So that wouldn't change, but it would allow you a more local determination.
Okay, thank you. That's, again, helpful. Steve?
Thanks, Jess. And I can understand how that would work, and thanks for the explanation a bit better on that. And I can understand how that would work in some of the rural areas and some of the small developments. What I have concerns on generally, Chair, on that one is in relation to the SUs and the housing estates that have certainly been built in our towns. Because I think what we had in the past was that ensured some kind of hopeful mixed delivery around the site, rather than blocks of social housing, ownership housing. My personal preference is to mix it all up and not have blocks of rented housing and bought housing on different parts of the state. You get like gated villages or gated towns to a such. I'd mix it all up. I just think it works better for society myself. And I think what we had in the past, if you actually forced in that 10%, you actually had some affordable owned housing, you had rented housing, and then you had obviously the other stock types of different tenures in relation to into those estates. And I've just, hopefully, Chair, as we go forward in the future, or my concern is that actually maybe not leave it down to the developers so much, but we try to ensure that we have mixed tenures certainly on the town developments. I think rural areas would be fine in themselves in relation to how small they are, in relation to delivery, in relation to local need. Because, as you say, it's based on local need. But in towns, it's much harder to do that. And it comes back to what I said earlier. You end up with blocks of housing, which is just not my personal preference.
I mean, I do agree with that. I mean, if you remember during some of the discussions on the East Northamptonshire local plan, that there clearly is a locally identified need for rural housing. But that is a different animal to the large SUEs. And I do agree with your comment that we don't necessarily want to have, or we don't want to have social housing here, affordable housing here, private ownership housing here, because, as you say, it encourages a sort of semi-ghettoisation, and that is not at all what we're trying to achieve, and it isn't, and as you rightly observe, I don't think it's good for society in general. To have people living together is probably better than having this bit there and that bit there. So, yeah, interesting. You raised a question, though, Anne, and I think, with it being given down to the local level, are you reasonably happy with that?
No, maybe it is my lack of understanding, but it does raise alarm bells with me. And it's in several places, 3 different places in the paper, at least that I saw. I don't see the difference between products and I mean, maybe it's my understanding, but I am alarmed by this removal of the 10% affordable homes.
Okay, Graham, of course.
Sorry, forgive me. I can understand your concerns in terms of the way that you're looking at this. I can completely understand that. I think it's worth, therefore, trying to get a bit more clarity. And Sue, you've been very helpful already, but it's just, again, I'm trying to get up to speed with the proposals in the consultation as well. So at the moment, our local plan has a requirement for, what did you say, 40% affordable housing?
Sorry, I was...
It's okay. So in our local plan at the moment, there's a requirement for 40% affordable housing. Is that, again, just so we all understand, is that set out in national requirements, or is that a local decision?
No, so that's a local decision based on our own local evidence of both what we need, but also what is, viable to deliver. So our need is probably higher than that.
Yes.
But in terms of the evidence that we had at the time of that local plan, that was as much as we could viably deliver.
Sure. So we have set 40% at the moment. Yeah. In the consultation, in the NPPF consultation, does that 40% remain something that the local authority determines?
Yes.
Yeah. So going forward, therefore, there's no proposal to change, at the national level, no proposal to change the fact that local authorities can determine the overall commitment or requirement for affordable homes. So under that, we could carry on requiring 40% on our sites in North Northamptonshire. What the MPPF is allowing us to do, or proposing to allow us to do, is to determine the type of affordable housing that we have. So it removes the requirement for us to provide 10% of the 40% as home ownership. And we could determine that actually we don't need 10% of the 40% to be home ownership. We need a large percentage to be social rent, for example, because then it allows residents to access the housing market through social rent rather than through home ownership. So it actually gives us more flexibility to provide affordable homes that are required and needed by our residents. So it provides more local flexibility. So I think it's probably a positive thing, which is what officers are reflecting in the response to the consultation.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you for that.
Well, no, it is useful to work that out. And it is actually, encouraging that our local plan can, in fact, still have those teeth and provide a stronger response than indicated by the MPPF. But that has often been the case, because the MPPF, by its nature, regardless of which government's in power, the MPPF has got to be rather generic. It has got to reflect everything, whereas we can reflect local circumstances. Steve?
Yes, Chair, and I remember us the 40% and our requirements. It would be just interesting as we go forward to have the data in relation to how much, especially as it's just been said that that might not even be enough now in relation to going forward. It would just be very interesting, Chair, on the counter to that, as developers who want to make profits out of sites, just how many of those have been argued down on a viability basis, and that we haven't been able to deliver the 40% on the sites we want, because I'm actually pretty well guessing that we actually haven't delivered on that 40% quite a lot in the last few years.
Absolutely. I know you and I, back in the day, have strongly been conscious of developers coming up with viability arguments, and that is the sting in the tail. It has got to be a discussion that takes place on individual applications or individual parcels which are being discussed. So obviously there's no one size fits all. But I wonder, Sue, if you've got any thoughts about viability and about how we can enforce, as far as we can, adherence to what was to the 40% rule, or at least something strongly approaching it.
I mean, it's something we obviously...
It's a simple one.
Yes, a very simple question. Thank you for that one. It's obviously something that we're all aware of, and we have tried to put in the response here that it is something that we feel that should be looked at in terms of the rules surrounding how viability is worked out, and particularly in terms of the detail of how much profit you are supposed to enable the developer to take out of that when the criteria is done. And we do always, as an authority, try to get independent assessments of those viability models where we can. I think the other thing that's important is about how affordable housing is funded overall, and looking at other models of funding social housing, and whether that can be done through 100% affordable housing schemes, how housing associations are funded, and that sort of thing. I don't know whether, Des, you want to come in on any of that, or... Sorry, put you on the spot now.
No, sorry, just saying, I'm Des Tanzer. I'm Housing Strategy and Enabling Officer. So I comment a lot on like the affordable housing proposals on sites where an affordable housing contribution is due. I mean, essentially, there's two ways that the sort of affordable housing comes through. One is through Section 106 sites, where, as we've discussed, the 40%. It's 40% in rural areas, I think, is it 30% in market towns and 20% on SUS. So that's one way through which the affordable housing comes through. The second way, as Sue said, an alternative way is where it's 100% affordable, and that's where a registered provider will come forward with land, and they will possibly have grant funding from Homes England, and so that grant funding provides the whole of that site as 100% affordable. Now, obviously on those ones, there's a lot more flexibility around what kind of tenure is provided, so there'd be more of a sort of a balanced mix of different types of tenures, some low cost of ownership, some shared ownership, and then quite a lot of rent, because that's what our evidence base, as my colleagues have said, very much point towards rent. So that's the sort of the landlord. Going back to the section 106, what we obviously are finding, and it's a really good, it's a really important question you asked, is that when there's an obligation for affordable housing, viability comes in, demonstrating how it impacts on their profit, and therefore they're not going to be able to provide the policy levels. And then what we get instead is either a reduced percentage, or sometimes we get, sometimes the viability report will show nothing at all. Well, no affordable units. It might show an off-site contribution, or it might just demonstrate that a smaller percentage, but you know, it has to be this tenure rather than that tenure. So quite often it will be a home ownership tenure, because that's there's less loss to a developer in being able to sell that unit onto a registered provider. So yeah, it does impact, and what we see in this MPPF, particularly by the references to things like asking us to look specifically at the need for social rent, is yes, it's trying to encourage us to encourage developers to produce more of those needed tenures, but there's nothing quite in there yet at the moment which sets out the detail of how we overcome the viability argument, which we know will come in with the application. Sorry, does that help? Sorry.
I think that's quite. I think that's good analysis, because we've got viability impacts, which have always been a thorn in our side. That a developer comes up and says, "I can't do it like this because it's not viable." And of course, it has a concomitant effect on Section 106 or developer contributions, because
Thanks. Just quickly, and thank you for the responses on that. And I know we're going off the questions a bit back onto the local plan, but I mean, it's fundamental on, if we're going to keep the 40% going forward, on how we try to deliver on that, because I appreciate the answers. But going back to the previous conversation, Chair, that doesn't deliver mixed society, or mixed, that's probably the wrong word. But, you know, 100% affordable, social, rented delivery by social is great, because you've got your 100% delivery of your possible 40% need that's been trying to be got out of by the developer, but it doesn't then give you a proper community. That's better. Mixed-use tenure, which is going back to the point I was making previously, because I certainly see it. I mean, you know, Rushden has changed, and I can only go by because it's the area I live in, but that's changed quite considerably in the last 10, 15 years during this plan period, and not for the better. And I would certainly, Chair, like to, you know, going forward, hopefully, that we can still deliver those mixed tenures rather, and actually nail down on the 106 agreement and deliver those sites, rather than back to separation, and you've got social landlord area, and I've nothing against those, and then the market area, because then you've got separation of society again, which is back to our previous conversation.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, Anne. No, I was just murmuring in the background. Oh, Anne? Oh no, no. I mean, but you're right. Promoting mixed-use development is best for everybody in that sense. To have 100% affordable social housing in a huge block, it's possibly not what we're always trying to achieve. It is better to have that housing mix, and we've always striven to deliver a mixed housing mix in our large-scale developments, as well as obviously in the smaller scale. Go on, Sue.
I just wanted to add that even when we're talking about 100% affordable housing scheme, that doesn't mean 100% of housing is the same. So 100% affordable housing could mean low-cost home ownership, it could mean shared ownership, it could mean social rent, it could mean affordable rent. So you can still get a balance of different tenures and different types of people, even in a 100% scheme.
Okay, excellent. That was fun. Simon, where are we?
Thanks,
How
Trevor.
far have we got?
Well, not with.
Don't
We've got
think
some
we've
very
had-
useful feedback as well as we develop the approach, because just to emphasise, the local need and the local evidence, the conversations with yourself, you know, the aspirations are all factors that we can take forward in the local plan. So thank you for that really useful discussion. Just a few more elements to bring to members' attention. Chapter 6, requiring well-designed development. The reference to beauty that was added into the 2023 MPPF, beauty and beautiful, to be clear, are proposed to be reversed.
Everything's got to be
Taken out,
Oh, thank you.
removed from the MPPF, to be very clear. I think we'd previously raised concerns about the subjectivity of beauty and beautiful, so we would be supportive of that change, and we feel as officers that there's enough mechanisms within the MPPF and other documents to ensure that schemes are well designed. As 4.71 of the report stresses, it will be important to ensure that the council has sufficient design resources to implement national and local policy, and that includes assessing proposals and producing local design codes. So that's going to be absolutely key in the implementation.
Can I just ask a question on that? Local design codes, how are they introduced? To what do they refer, and how many teeth do they have? Because I'm quite interested in. We've often discussed this, but how does a local design code fit into the local plan, and how does it impact upon national planning policy framework?
So, it's within the earlier in the report. I didn't sort of draw it out, but one of the proposed changes is, rather than area-wide design codes, there's a proposal to bring more focused site-specific codes linked to schemes. So we're still working through exactly what that would mean in practice. But we would see it as, in terms of the local plan, that the local plan would set a sort of overarching design policy, and then the more site-specific detail could come through the local design code as set out in the MPPF. So it would be a way of informing the policy of a site allocation and the parameters for that. But there'd also be a more detailed document that could sit alongside your local plan that would inform the assessment and determination of a planning application.
So that would be a sort of form of SPD that would support the evidence base for the local plan.
In whatever mechanism it could be called, because
yes,
I don't want
course,
to go back,
yes.
but you know, it could be a supplementary plan.
Yeah.
It could be, and just to bring members' attention to, it's para 4.14 of the covering report that talks about,
Thank you.
Rather than district-wide design codes, is the proposal for more localised. And again, I think we're quite supportive of that. I think it might aid with resources, but also it would allow more local distinctiveness to be picked up. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Steve?
Chair, I don't recall the title, but it wasn't that long ago, of course, towards the end of the JPU. You recall we had an officer and we were doing a document that actually was going to be complementary, that we actually never signed off. I think it might have been end of 2019, perhaps, was it? Yeah. But we actually had that. The very thing you're talking about, we actually were progressing. And obviously the officer left, and that's quietly been forgotten in relation to resources and staffing we've got now. But I don't think it was ever disregarded completely. I think it was quite a meaty document, if I remember right.
Well, you'll remember the late, great Michael Tebbett was quite involved in that. Anyway, but yes, indeed. And that is something that could be revived within the context of what we're discussing. So that is of interest.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Councillor North, absolutely right. It was the last ever meeting of the Joint Planning Committee. We're talking about the design charter and the the building for a healthy life. So that was the report, and absolutely we need to, take forward that through the local plan and also the implementation. Chapter 7, building infrastructure to grow the economy. I thought it would be remiss not to bring to members' attention the proposed changes, particularly to para 84, as it will be in the track changes, that council should identify appropriate sites for commercial development which meet the needs of a modern economy. And there's been additions to para 84 which talk about suitable locations for uses such as laboratories, gigafactories, data centres, digital infrastructure and freight and logistics. So the package of proposals is like we touched on earlier, is sort of pro economic development, and as we say in the implications, these changes will inevitably be used by site promoters for the sectors. So again, it's just emphasising that logistics is obviously going to be a key issue, and that's sort of strengthened in the MPPF. We've tried to set out in the covering report and in the response that the council wanting a balanced economy, recognising the role of logistics, but the desire for that to form part of a balanced economy and delivering high quality jobs. And you're well aware of the evidence base that we're producing to inform the approach.
Yeah, I mean, I am conscious of where we are in England. I am conscious of the need and the logicality of some logistics development. We're not against all logistics development, but it is so important, and I'm glad it's picked up, that we want a balanced economy, not all our economic eggs in one particular sector of the economy. One thing that does concern me is the potential for the Secretary of State to get involved in strategic development. And this isn't really a discussion for the NPPF as such, but it is, I think, a discussion that we need to consider how nationally significant infrastructure projects are chosen and at what level. I mean, I think we're all aware of a very substantial renewable energy project in the west of Northamptonshire and the east of West Northamptonshire. I think I boxed the compass on that sentence. And I know that's already been delineated as a project of national significance. I would be concerned if smaller scale but nevertheless significant projects which may already be in the pipeline were to be called in by the Secretary of State. I mean, we are the local planning authority. I think that there should be a presumption that we do our own placemaking, and I'm pleased that at 4.77 the point is made that Northamptonshire's contribution to meeting the level of wider future demand for logistics should not be at the cost of good placemaking, nor without the appropriate level of mitigation. Now, I know the JCS, of blessed memory, does have its policy 26 on logistics, but it's an elderly document, and as the new plan comes into effect, it will have to reflect the MPPF. So I think this is going to be a headache. We are in that part of England, but we do need to manage that headache as much as possible, and we do need to remind government that, as you rightly say, that strategic development, commercial development, whether it be logistics or whether it be any other sector, should not be at the expense of good placemaking. Steve. Then Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You're well aware that you and I share the same view on this for considerable years, and not to go over the very good conversation we had at the last meeting. 4.76 and when you mentioned 4.77, there is that relevance of reflecting the importance of logistics, but I think it does still concern me that we have to mention that. But I mean, obviously the last conversation, and you know what I'm going to say in relation to my concern about logistics, and 4.7 about appropriate mitigation. Well, again, my preference wouldn't be about mitigation in relation to infrastructure to take more logistics. My preference would be to have a better mixed-use economy in the first place, because it's not just about the money, it's about having a mixed-use economy. And I think I take your point and share your view where we are in the country. We can't change that. But at some point, as we've discussed many times, the bottom will fall out and there will be divergence to something else, and there will be all these sites with these great big warehouses sitting on. And I think it's just the point, Chair, that yes, these warehouses have got more than 4 people in, and the jokes in the past that there ain't not many people in these buildings, and some of them can have substantial people in. But I think it's just that point of having a mixed-use economy as much as we can. And again, as you know, there's been a serious drift in this part of the country in the last 10, 15 years, and again, not for the better. It would be good to actually grow the economy, build on the education of our young people, and actually have different choices in the market rather than just these great big warehouses and not a great deal else in some areas. And of course, that's across all of Northamptonshire and our main towns, and all these sites are being built out. And there's some really big ones still coming forward. And again, I'm not against development, the economy, logistics. It's just a greater choice. And again, I'll come back to, I wouldn't necessarily want to see it mitigated out with infrastructure income. My choice would be actually a wider choice of economy in the first place.
Yeah, completely agree. And yes, the logistics will logically always form part of what goes on in Northamptonshire, in Warwickshire, in Leicestershire, in all this amazing golden triangle. That's just an economic reality. And it is, as I observed at the beginning of this discussion, it is a commercial world out there, and people will want to invest in areas that give a return. And so, of course, you have to take that into consideration. But to have a balanced economy is so important, because if there is a downturn in one form of economic activity, which might be distribution and freight and logistics, then that could be serious if we've put all our investment and all our economic strategy into that sector. We do want to encourage other sectors of the economy to come here, again, making use of the excellent geographical position that we're in. I mean, I know that the term is not fashionable anymore, but we are about halfway between Oxford and Cambridge in the old Arc. We have got brilliant road and rail connections. We've got, I think, 5 international airports within not very far. And that's true for freight and logistics, to be sure, but it is also true for everything else. And also, we can't to make our area less attractive means that people are less willing to come and live here and spend their money here and invest here. So, we have to have jobs for people. You picked up on it, you touched on it with education and, our young people, and that's absolutely fundamental. But it is also for inward investment and for encouraging people to come here and set their businesses up, whatever that business might be. So we just need to note logistics and freight and delivery and all of that, but also encourage other inward investment. And that is something which is placemaking. It's not even necessarily the National Planning Policy Framework, but it's placemaking, which is something which isn't just planning. This isn't just us. This is something that the whole council needs to be considering and reflecting into things like our Big 50 project and other more holistic discussions that are taking place across all of Northamptonshire and all of this region of England, however you slice it up. So, yeah, very, very interesting stuff. Robin.
Thank you, Chair. Going through some of this, as you're aware, we got the energy park coming up, the discussion. Is this now making it easier for this to go forward? And is it going to be harder for planning councillors to reject it?
Oh, that's a dangerously approached a straight question, that. No, oh dear. Go on, Simon.
I will
dive in.
Endeavour to answer, and then if more esteemed colleagues to my left want to correct me, feel free. I think it's important to say that I think the package of proposals would lend more national policy to support to such schemes, because the policies, the proposed changes are very positive towards renewable energy, strong emphasis on economic growth, etc., etc. So the national policy position from the old MPPF to what this new MPPF would be more supportive of such kind of proposals, but that's not necessary to say that it's a green light for anything, because there's the usual considerations, the development plan, material considerations, of which the MPPF is one of them, but certainly the whole package is more supportive of such. It provides more national policy weight behind a scheme, but obviously the council is still the decision maker of any proposal against the development plan and other considerations.
Well, it is, so long as the council is the decision maker. And with some of the more strategic schemes, that may not necessarily be so.
Can I just... my concern is really, it's like, when we're sitting on planning, it's making it harder for councillors to say, you know what I mean, to say no to something, even though it's there to say, really, it should go forward. It's putting the pressure on other people, I feel, sometimes on this.
I mean, Robin, you're right. It's always difficult when you are sitting on planning and you get a large application which may or may not be controversial, whatever it is, doesn't matter whether it's housing, whether it's logistics, whatever, there is always that tension between the presumption in favour of sustainable development and whether or not you think that this particular scheme ticks all the boxes, and what material planning considerations there are against it, if there are any. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? And it always will be. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested with what Simon was saying, that there is, with the NPPF, more support nationally for both housing and commercial development, and it's something we're going to have to work with. Steve?
Just one following on from that, Chair, and again, it's a partly answer to the questions, but I think, with all the chatter before the election and some of it post, if there is this conversation that actually, what Robin is talking about, that actually the need for planning committees per se and the local decision making is actually going to be reduced, because the perceived arguments or things been that there actually will be less role for councillors going forward, whether it's greater authorities or smaller in number. I think again it might be just one of those things that how we try to make sure that the new local plan delivers if we're not going to have so much of an input into it. As in, your concern some time ago, Chair, you said you'd be concerned with the Secretary of State or someone or minister intervening in relation to larger applications, and what Robin has just said, that how we ensure the next local plan going forward, we do all this work to make sure it's local and deliver that. Actually, how we can actually deliver on that if there is actually going to be less decision making locally. I know it's a wider conversation, but massive, probably more important than the previous 20 years in relation to local planning, because I fear that maybe there will be less involvement of members going forward in the future. It seems to be heading that way.
I mean, I would certainly agree with that, but I would also say that this government policy covers the whole country, and as a local planning authority, we are in a much, much, much better position than so many other local authorities up and down the country. We do have a reasonably up-to-date local plan. We are working on with all the changes, so God knows how poor Simon and colleagues are doing, but we are working on a new local plan. We have got a 5-year housing land supply. There are so many local authorities which neither have a local plan nor a 5-year housing land supply, and as Simon observed at the beginning when he was making his introduction earlier, the Secretary of State has said that she will be using her powers to intervene where delivery does not take place. Fortunately, in our area, because of our successful 20-year period of growth and delivery of both housing and indeed commercial development, we are in a much better position than a lot of other authorities. Doesn't mean we're out of jail, doesn't mean that we could not have the Secretary of State intervening on strategic development, but the Secretary of State's eyes have got to be elsewhere in the country as well. And that, I think, may help. But in the end, we have to work with the realities we've got. And we do have to come up with a local plan that covers our placemaking agenda, what we want to achieve here in North Northamptonshire. And that will be a strong evidence base. And then for a Secretary of State, whoever that might be, to intervene over the top is still possible, but it obviously means that it's in conflict if we've got a strong local evidence base that we've already articulated. Does that help you, Robin and Steve, and does that help you, Simon?
That's an excellent answer. I just want to emphasise that in terms of plan making, the package of reforms still very, very clear that it's a plan-led system, and the Appendix C, which was the letter from the Deputy Prime Minister, talks about universal coverage of local plans and says, I believe strongly in the plan-making system. So I think the proposals are very clear that all of the issues the Chair has said and that have been discussed today, we still, working through you, will progress the local plan to pick up the evidence-based local issues, etc., etc. So I don't think they're looking to take away sort of the role of the local plan. If anything, they're saying we want you to do it, we want universal coverage, we want it done quickly. And I think, as the Chair said, and members will all be aware, we're in a very strong position with the JCS and the 4 Part 2 local plans, the history of working at North Northamptonshire level, so where it's looking at better strategic planning measures, the strengthening the duty to cooperate. We feel as officers working through yourselves as members that we've got the foundations in place to respond to the challenges. So I think it's still going to be a plan-led system.
And I'd just add to that remember when you make planning decisions, the local plan again is the first point of call, and that also applies for national government when they're doing it through NSIP as well. Yeah. They still have to have regard to the local plan. So if you've got things in your local plan, that inspector still has to take that into account. So it's the local plan that are means to that local feel and that local determination.
Thank you, Sue. I think I upset Simon earlier, so you'd just like to come in?
Thank you, Councillor Brackenbury. I think Councillor Brackenbury explained it very, very well. He sort of picked up what the points that I was going to make. My reading of the NPPF is that the changes that are proposed are, small percentage changes as they affect North Northamptonshire. I think because of the nature of North Northamptonshire as a council, there are other councils that those percentage changes are significantly greater. So if you're pushing against national policy and you're distinctly different in direction to that national policy, then it's really quite stark and very challenging. And I think some of those messages in here are directed to those authorities that aren't following the principles around understanding and recognising and accommodating growth for your area. We've, over a period of time, sought to accommodate it in a positive sense and help to shape our area. And I think if we continue to do that, then we'll remain on the right side. And so the NPPF won't be as challenging as it will be for many other authorities. So it's picking up that point. It doesn't mean to say that we don't have to work hard on it and we don't have to find the right evidence and we don't have to give shape to it. But I don't think we should necessarily see this document as too challenging or scary for us to go about accommodating in our own way.
Well, thank you, Simon. I think that's helpful. And certainly, excuse me, certainly the earliest part of the letter from Mrs. Rayner is that I believe strongly in the plan-making system. It is the right way to plan for growth and environmental enhancement. I mean, the devil's in the detail. We'll see what happens. But if we keep our own decks as clear as possible and have a robust local plan, as you rightly say, Sue, that has to be taken into consideration, even if the Secretary of State is taking a particular application under their wing. It still has to pass that test. So it's something we need to be concerned about, something we need to keep an eye on. But we are in a better position, as I say, than so many local authorities up and down the country. And there are some local authorities whose position is actually quite dire in terms of plan making and in terms of delivery. Okay. Any thoughts coming back? Carry on, Simon. Excellent.
Thanks, Chair.
Did you get a nice rest?
Yeah, just to echo everything you've just said regarding and Simon on the implications and where we're positioned. Renewable energy, Chapter 9, says supporting renewable deployment. I'd need to check whether that's a typo, but anyway, it's like we've touched on and has come up earlier that government's proposing amendments to the NPPF to direct decision makers to give significant weight to the benefits associated with renewable and low carbon energy generation, and proposals to meet a net zero future. So it's a more permissive approach to proposals for renewable and low carbon energy generation. So it's obviously relevant to the consideration of planning applications and to the development of the plan. As we set out in 4.88 of the report, we're well underway with evidence to inform the approach through the local plan and to sort of respond to these policy requirements. And I think in terms of the sort of more permissive, that's been seen with some of the Secretary of State's decisions on solar farms across the country. It's obviously more of a development management issue, but 4.84 of the report, government is proposing that onshore wind is reintegrated into the NSIP regime, but it's proposing that the threshold at which onshore wind projects are determined as nationally significant is 100 megawatts. So it's sort of increasing the threshold. So actually, for certain proposals, that will bring more for the local authority, for the council to determine. Chapter 10 changes to local plan intervention. Sorry.
Will you do, Steve?
Yeah, just a quick one. In relation to the megawatt delivery, what kind of acreage are you talking about in relation to questions 75 and 76?
150 meg.
Because obviously it's not the megawatt delivery, it's the size of the site and the grief we'll get as councillors. I'm more concerned about.
Okay, and I'm not. Is there an answer? No, I don't think there's
not
an answer to that.
But the point is taken
Yeah.
in terms of the size and the impacts that would arise.
How
from
many
that.
cricket pitches? You know?
Yeah. We've touched on. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, but seriously, Joe, I mean,
No,
I
no,
appreciate the thing, but I mean, actually, that is obviously significant in relation to one, our allocations, and secondly, yes, it gives developers flexibility, but what actually are we looking at in relation to
I think it's
seriousness of the impact on? We have many issues around here, whether it's the energy park here or the West solar farm delivery. I mean, would that, you know, it's just when it moves from local to national significance and the size and scale of the development.
I think it's really difficult to give a definitive answer on that kind of thing because, as I understand it, it very much depends on exactly what technology they're using on which individual site and how they're laying it out. So looking at Green Hill Farm, for example, the solar farm, it will depend what type of solar panels they use, how far apart they are, what direction they're facing. There's so many different variables that would affect how much land take is involved to get a particular wattage. So I don't think there's a simple correlation. The same would apply to wind as well. Depends how high it up is, how fast the wind is, what size of turbine it is, how close the turbines are together, all of those things. So, yeah, I don't think there's a simple answer to that, I'm afraid.
No, I think it's a well-made point. You know, 150 megawatts it sounds wonderful. It sounds like, but what does that mean on the ground? And I appreciate there'll be variation. I do understand, but you know, is it sort of a square mile, a square kilometre, half a square kilometre? You know, even with variation, it would be useful to have an idea of an indicative area that would be covered by the nationally significant threshold for solar farms, particularly solar farms, because of course they take up more acreage. I mean, it would just be helpful, I think, probably in national guidance, just to give an idea, while it's appreciated there is variation, to give an idea of what you mean on the ground. Simon, did you want to?
We can certainly think about incorporating that within our response in terms of a question or clarity over that, but just to give a sense over Kettering Energy Park, my understanding is that the solar proposal there is for 50 megawatts, so that's a reasonable size solar presence there. So times that by 3, and it suggests to me that the figures that they're talking about is a couple of steps again beyond that sort of size. So I still think that it's some way to go before it then becomes an NSIP scheme. Okay. That would be my reading of it.
Thank you. That's actually quite helpful. That's helpful. You know, we know the size roughly of the Kettering Energy Park proposal. Robin, I have piqued your curiosity.
No, thank you for that, Chair. It would have been nice, I think, in the government report to be in a bit more pushing forward more like solar panels being put on the warehouses more. We've got a lot of warehouses. It could have been an encouragement to some kind of investment in that instead of just going onto land. Because, you know, the square meterage of warehouses we could use it. And I think we're missing a trick here. They are missing something there.
I think quite a lot of the new warehouse developments do, in fact, have PVs on the roof. But you're right. Sorry, did you want to come out soon? Anyone? I think you make a good point. Steve?
Yeah, just very quickly, Chair, and thanks for the answers on all of that. But but the thing is, from my point of view, is we've just done a call for sites for the next local plan. We've got a government change of emphasis on this in relation to the deliverability. And I appreciate all the answers we've had, but we're just heading for a new local plan. We've done the call for sites, and then obviously the government have actually the importance, the significance of the carbon neutrality and all the solar farms and wind farms. And I'm just concerned that we're not quite factored those in relation to going forward at the moment because of the changes that have just taken place. And I appreciate we'll probably do a call for sites again because of the changes, the timelines, but from my point of view, it does leave us a bit open where we've done that, we've got this emphasis from the government, and we haven't really got an idea what kind of land which will be needed, and especially if we're going to look at more sustainability, and in the future they may look for, like the Chelveston, local delivery of energy uses in relation to urban areas. So I'm just concerned, Chair, going forward in relation to how we deliver on a new local plan in relation to this part of it, in relation to into the solar farms, and if we haven't got an idea, quite rightly, but we haven't got an idea what kind of land needed.
Okay.
I've just double-checked Green Hill Solar Farm. That's 500 megawatts. So just to put that in terms of, that's huge compared to this nationally significant threshold.
But it is huge because,
yes,
if I'm right, the proposed geographical layout for Green Hill goes from East Mears Ashby nearly all the way down
it's
to...
actually higher up than that. It goes sort of in West Northamptonshire.
Yeah.
So it goes up from sort of Moulton, I think it is, all the way down from Mears Ashby.
It's pretty much down to Beaujeu.
Yeah.
So it's about 14 miles.
Yeah.
In north to south, it's not as wide, but it's
and it's not contiguous either.
No, there's clumps.
It's parcels. But
it's huge.
Yeah, but that's 500 megawatts, so it's massive.
Because I think, Ken, you were at the presentation in Wellingborough on that, weren't you? And, it is ginormous. It's in 4 clumps. And there's all sorts of clever stuff being considered about cabling and getting across or under the River Nene then. So, it's a big project with a lot of engineering constraints, quite apart from anything else, because the longer the cabling, the less efficient. So, yeah. I don't know.
I just wonder really whether it will actually go ahead, because there's a lot of opposition to it. But I'm not sure whether there's an awful lot that we can do now.
Well, we're a consultee, and we will make our points known, as obviously will West Northamptonshire. But it is a project that's been taken into the Secretary of State, and will be determined by, not literally the Secretary of State, but by the Planning Inspectorate in due course. But, we obviously are a consultee. It is a concerning project, and its benefits have got to outweigh its disbenefits. But that is against a somewhat subjective answer. Okay. Right.
Thank you, Chair. Nearly there. Just to pick up on Councillor North's concerns, comments in terms of the sort of package of proposals in the MPPF regarding renewable. Like we've touched on, we are the evidence to inform the approach through the local plan that we'll develop with you is well underway. That includes landscape sensitivity. That will include landscape sensitivity analysis in relation to different renewable energy typologies. So that will, we feel, allow us to respond as we need to through the local plan. So that work is underway to inform the approach. Couple of other things just to pick up. Chapter 11 of the consultation proposes to increase planning fees, including for household applications, to improve resources for local planning authorities. Also looking at views on whether to introduce cost recovery for local planning authorities, input into NSIP applications, which is topical given what we've just talked about in relation to Green Hill Farm, and the government's also interested in views on the principle of allowing planning fees to fund wider planning services. So we're working up and worked up the response with development management, but I think as the response sets out, anything that can enhance resources would be supported. Chapter 12, and it's the last chapter, but the proposals are obviously of particular relevance to this EAP. The future of planning policy and plan making. The documents set out transitional arrangements and the implementation of the new planning system. I think I'd direct members to para 4.98 of the report, where the government sets out that it plans to implement the new plan making system from summer or autumn 2025, but critically, and we've talked with yourselves before, the current system plans, as it snappily says, the deadline for submitting a local plan under the current system that was due the 30th of June 2025, that deadline has now been extended to December 2026. So I think fundamentally, as the report sets out, we'll be bringing forward the local plan under the current system, and like was touched on earlier, looking to revise the local development scheme to bring back to yourself to set the timetable out. So we welcome the sort of clarity and the extension of the deadline, and it means that we will be progressing the plan under the current system, and we'll have that certainty of the new MPPF coming into effect by the end of the year, and that's all explained in 4.99 to 4.101 of the report. So,
okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you for your brief introduction.
I don't
Simon.
think I was speaking for that long because the excellent questions. Hopefully,
no, but that's what we wanted to do. So but honestly, thank you, Simon, for sort of steering us through the paper, and that I thought we've had a good discussion. And we have touched on many of the sort of more thorny points which have been indicated. I just wonder, and like you, I welcome the extension of the date with which the local plan should be submitted, because I know we were struggling with June 2025. 18 months is quite valuable. And remember, this is still a draft NPPF. It's still out for consultation. And we'll be making our consultation responses, as you know. So the NPPF will not come forward until, is it the end of the year, you said? Yeah. So we won't have the absolute certainty of the NPPF until the end of 2024, giving basically 2 years to have a local plan prepared and submitted by the end of 2026. So it does give much more breathing space for our somewhat hard-pressed colleagues in planning policy. So are there any other thoughts or comments? Ooh, a little cube beginning to form here. Steve, you got your hand up by a nose.
Thank you, Chair. Just on your last bit, and then just to go back to this room some time ago, and I know we've had the discussion recently again. It's just, obviously, we made a decision in this room based on the original timelines in relation to 25 of getting things in on time, and therefore not starting again with a whole new plan, of course, and building on the current last two core spatial strategies, which I didn't disagree with, but we were obviously trying to hit that target of 2025. In line, appreciate what you just said, Chair, and I don't necessarily disagree. It's just, is there any change or reflection in relation to, obviously we're a new authority now, are you still sharing the view that actually updating the last two core spatial strategies and how old all that data is in relation to when it was formed, appreciating we were authorities working together? I suppose what I'm asking is is that still relevant going forward in relation to the original core strategies, or has there been any thought given at all to starting again from fresh because of the extra time we got, and actually just having a break? This is a new authority, forget the old core spatial strategy, this is a new part one plan, let's start, and I know there'll probably be a look of horror with some officers say, but you know, is any thought given to just, this is a new authority, starting fresh, forgetting all the old stuff from the legacies, even though we're working together, and you know, making a fresh start rather than updating a 10-year-old plan where work went into when, you know, was a very, very long time ago. I just thought it's worth asking.
Yeah, I think it is. Simon, did you want to help us here?
Happy
Yeah,
to.
yeah. I think we keep him for this sort of question, you know.
So, in light of the NPPF, we're recognising that there's a slight shift change, particularly around housing numbers, but there's some other elements there. We've always maintained that we're forecasting the direction that proposals may go in terms of emerging policy. So we'll continue to do that. I think where we are is we had a good core spatial strategy. We've still got a good joint core strategy. So we're proposing that we undertake, I think it's a Regulation 10A study. So it's using a Planning Advisory Service toolkit. And we'll bring that back to you at the next EAP in November. That will reflect on the status of all of our policies or our development plan policies. So that's inclusive of the joint core strategy, but other policies too. And we'll need to report on the weight that we consider, whether there are any that are out of date, and if so, we may need to lose those. But I think our sense is that those policies are supported by evidence. The evidence that we're undertaking to date doesn't provide that much disparity. We've been on the track and we haven't fallen off the track, but we'll need to undertake an honest appraisal of our policies. In doing so, it'll give us that confidence to progress with a revised local plan and set the timetable for going forward with that. We're anticipating that because of the progress we've already been making and where we are with it, that with a short update, we'll be able to progress and make that submission ahead of the December 26 deadline. And it'll also mean that we anticipate that we won't feel it necessary to leave any elements behind because, you know, it's going to take longer to collect the necessary evidence or go through the consultations. So, you know, our view is, and we're looking for endorsement and support from yourselves, is that local plan making is even more important now, and so we need to grab hold of it and move forward and progress that local plan in a timely manner, and that's one of the keys as well, so that the evidence doesn't run out of time and it's still very current and defendable when we get to examination.
Thanks, Jed. If I could I appreciate it, but just question. So that's a no then. We're not starting fresh. Just to be absolutely clear, it was a great answer, and thanks, Simon, because it's absolutely right. We've got great evidence base. We've done call for sites. We're built on a lot of stuff. And I appreciate your serious answer in relation to bringing stuff back, checking against policies. But it is actually, and another point, it is actually a serious no. We're not starting from scratch. We're actually going to build on the stuff from the past. It's still relevant. The evidence is still there. We're going to review it all, bring it back in November, and then work on stuff that we may think needs revising. I just want to be...
Or, as a middle way, we've got four Part 2 local plans. In producing a updated local plan, which need not necessarily just be a successor to the joint core strategy, might that incorporate the part 2 local plans into one plan without changing the structure? So you would have 4 chapters within a joint core strategy. I don't know if that is a viable thought.
So where we're going with it is that we will revise the joint core strategy, so that will fall away as a result of the local plan work. There may be some policies, or there will be, I quite expect, some policies within the Part 2 local plans that fall away, but we may well be able to retain some others. So in effect, we're harmonising common area policies across each of the 4 Part 2 local plans. I'd like to say that we're not going to start it again, but planning being planning, we'll go through a process. We'll find the evidence. We'll test it, and then we'll come back with a recommendation, and we'll seek your views on that. We're not broken, but we need to run a test to prove that that's the case if the evidence is there to demonstrate. So it needs to be fair and it needs to be honest, and we need to challenge it. But we're confident that we'll find an appropriate means forward with that. That means that we're already several steps down the line. We're not having to go all the way back to go all the way forward again, because that then I think would leave us challenged for the December 26 timeline that we want to meet.
Thanks, Chair. Just to follow on from what Simon has just said. Obviously, this report has focused on the proposed changes and the proposed reforms. But if you look at what will be the latest version of the NPPF, the scope of strategic policies and non-strategic policies is largely unchanged. So the sort of framework that we consulted on, the scope and issues for the strategic plan and the issues that it should cover, now that is still largely the same. So the evidence that we've done and the work we've done through the scope and issues consultation, we asked nearly 40 questions. So that a lot of those questions were how much detail should we go into on certain issues. So we've got that information and that evidence alongside the sort of policy review that Simon talked about that can allow us to discuss what we think the appropriate scope of the new local plan could be, and alongside that new local plan, how much of the policies in the current Part 2 local plans are saved and retained. So there's a huge amount of work, like Simon touched on in the chair, that's been done, but we're doing that sort of relook and refresh that will bring back to yourselves. And obviously we've got the series of member workshops coming up, and the next one in a couple of weeks on the settlement hierarchy and settlement boundaries. That's exactly the kind of issue that the new plan will respond to, in terms of looking at what the 4 Part 2 local plan, the different approaches within them, and what a robust approach may be for the local plan, etc., etc.
Yeah, I'd just add to that as well. We've had all these discussions, haven't we, about what the scope of the plan is, and I think that is always the critical point that we come back to. And I think we've made some comments in here about making sure that as much as we can we're future-proofing this plan that we're making for the new system, whatever that is. So planning always evolves as it goes along. We always have to sort of take on board that new change, don't we? And where we can, I think we want to make sure that we're going to have a plan that will work in whatever the new system is going forward, because we don't want to be in a situation where, well, it's adopted, now we've got to start all over again with a new system and do something completely different. None of us want to be in that scenario either, do we? So it's about making sure that does evolve as we go forward. And we know that the new system that it looks like will come in is saying that there should be one local plan per authority. So I think we've got to have that in the back of our minds as well, that we do want to have one coherent document that expresses what we all want to do for North Northamptonshire.
Yeah, I think that's valuable, and certainly the NPPF, as revised, in paragraphs 17, 18 and 19, actually does make the point that the plan-making framework can be contained in joint or individual local plans, which may also include non-strategic policies, and the development plan for an area comprises the combination of strategic and non-strategic policies which are enforced for a particular time. So the actual format, while I know that the policies change, the actual format of the plan making does not, if I'm correct. Okay, Ken, I think you had your hand.
Well, I think it's been said now by Sue and Simon, actually. The spade work has been done, so we don't need to start all over again. No.
The only thing which would be valuable and is going to be a tremendous amount of work is harmonisation of the various policies in the Part 2 plans, because of course we were, they were Corby, they were Kettering, they were East Northamptonshire and so on, Wellingborough, and they vary to some extent. They're all good, they're all adopted, they're all been found sound, but of course they were delivered by the legacy authorities and will vary in some areas. I remember there was one thing came up, which was, I can't even remember what it was, but it had a policy in Kettering which was completely different to the policy in East Northamptonshire, and it actually mattered at the time. So there will be a lot of work that needs to be done to get a balanced series of policies that cover all of North Northamptonshire. And I know there's been a lot of work already going on in that, but it never stops.
Yeah, that's it. We need to modify what we've already got, but the work has been done.
Absolutely. Anne?
At the same time, it is a living document, so we can't close ourselves off completely to any suggestions for change that have been made. And Simon has already said there has been criticism expressed in other counties. I believe that there is an insufficient environmental emphasis, so protecting our own natural resources is important as well, and touching on the local nature recovery strategy as well. Thank you.
No, thank you. And you're right. Again, anything that we do, well, in whatever subject it may be, has to be backed by evidence. That evidence has to be tested. It has to be within the framework of national planning policy guidance, etc., etc. And then, if it has that evidence base, then it's of course. And so much of this can be a little bit conflicting, but in the end, a decision has to be made, and that will be coming down to our planners. But in the end, it will also come down to our good friend, the planning inspector, who will examine every plan in a very robust way. And my goodness, I don't know if any of you, I know some of you have had the pleasure of attending an examination, but they don't miss very much. They really don't. And, if your proposals are within national planning policy guidance, if they have been tested, if they are viable and the evidence base supports them, then that's fine. The inspector will as well. If not, then, oh dear, the red pen comes out. But no, thank you, because you're absolutely right. You have to have a balance. Okay. Simon, are we, no, hands. Right, Robin.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you, David.
Robin first.
Yeah, just going back a little bit, I've got sort of three questions here, really. The smaller size sites, now, I imagine this is going to be put a little bit of pressure on villages. I know you've got the neighbour plans in force on some of them. Would that force them to try to change how the houses are going to be done there? Sort of, is it putting pressure on them, saying, yeah, you've got to do this? And why? And would that affect neighbour plans, whatnot, in place at the moment, or are starting. The other question is highways. Would highways have a bigger say in things as well? Because I know we want more houses, but we would respect highways to say, no, that's not going to work. So I would hope that would happen. And the third question is, the village and towns are hoping that, would they be encouraged to come to like training sessions to explain how things are going? Because I think that's quite important, because there's a lot of changes, and the parishes are, you know, their meetings are not like this, but they really need to be encouraged to see what's going on.
Well, in reverse order, town and parish councils are being involved in training, and we are working on that to make sure that, as Anne observed a moment ago, it's a living document. These things change, and so we do need to try to keep up to date with changes for town and parish councils. Highways, well, now it's almost a development management question, this, because of course that depends upon the development and its highways impact. So yes, it could be an important matter for highways. And as far as you're also referring to the hierarchy of documents, aren't you? So you have the National Planning Policy Framework, you have the Part 1 and Part 2 plans, and then you have neighbourhood plans, all of which have to be in rough conformity with one another. So I don't know, a existing neighbourhood plan will be affected by national planning policy changes, which doesn't make it invalid, but a new neighbourhood plan, I think, would have to reflect national planning policy as it then is when that neighbourhood plan is submitted. Is that roughly right? Approximately. Okay.
So in terms of the 10%, I think the purpose of it, I think, is to encourage small and medium-sized developers, so that you're not overly reliant on the large sites and the large developers, which I think is something that most of us agree with. The difficulty can sometimes be the resources that are then required to identify 10% of all of our requirements. So if you think of what our overall requirement is, 10% of that's quite a lot to come from small sites. In the past, we would have done that through things like urban capacity studies. Those of you that have been around a long time will remember those. And identifying sites. I think there's benefit in that, because obviously we do want to encourage brownfield land wherever possible, so that we're identifying those sites first, so that we're protecting our countryside. But on the other hand, you don't want to do the urban cramming thing by just sort of throwing everything in on all those small sites. So I think the answer is really, like it is always in planning, it's a balance, isn't it? That what we want to seek is that it's locally determined about whether that is appropriate. I would imagine in a lot of urban authorities, 90% of their sites might be on small sites. In an authority like us, it might be less. And perhaps having that local determinism about what's appropriate is perhaps the way to go. But just some thoughts.
And there still is flexibility in the system in that regard, so we can still make our planning to suit us and our needs. It isn't yet a complete top-down, you will do this and that. So, planning policy and place-making is still devolved down, and, we are able to do what we need to do, except maybe if there is some massive strategic matter, in which case it might be a project of national significance, but mostly it wouldn't be. Steve?
Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah.
Appreciate the time. We briefly touched on the housing delivery numbers change with obviously the 5-year allowance and obviously the uplift in relation to. But I appreciate we've covered it before in the workshop, but we have still got the outstanding issue that not all our current housing numbers may be delivered, and a lot of those sites are still at risk. So I just want to hopefully, something will be coming back soon because, we've got an extra hour, nearly 4,000 through the change, but we're talking probably could have the same figure of non-deliverability in the current numbers. Just offhand, Chair, Rushton Sue should have perhaps 400 on there. I think 21 was the first accountable figures. I drove past it this morning and there's not a single house on it. 12 years on. Tresham Garden Village, the figures aren't included. Irfinborough, I don't know if those figures are in there, but obviously you've got the mines issue. I understand the Kettering, I'm not sure what it was called, but the area obviously off Windmill Avenue, the further extension, I thought that was called into question about not being delivered. These are just all from memory, Chair. Obviously Corby West hasn't happened, so it's just on the deliverability of what's in the current plan. And with the top-up figures, 8,000 is a huge number if we've got undeliverability on our current figures. I'm just wondering if we're going to have an update at some point, or you want an update at some point?
I thought on that cheery introduction that you've just made, I noticed that the clouds have suddenly descended and, there's a sort of rumble of thunder in the air. No, but you are right. I would be interested in that. But you are quite right to point out the delays, at least, in some of our strategic housing delivery.
Thank you, Chair. So we are undertaking a piece of work at the moment to better understand those sites, the characteristics, the progress that's been made, I suppose the trends and patterns, but then also moving on to understanding where there are delays, why those delays are, and what might be potential solutions for us supporting going about overcoming those so that we can accelerate development, in particular in relation to the garden communities. There are some snippets of good news in there, in that there were some conversations in recent days with regards to Tresham Garden Village, so we'll follow those up after it being quite quiet or defensive over a period of time. But we need to get to the root of it. That's all moving then towards a meeting that we're arranging with Homes England to understand any role that they may be able to play in supporting that accelerated delivery or continued delivery on those sites. And that could be through potentially some funding mechanisms, through grants or through specific delivery of aspects, or it could be through drawing upon their own skills, knowledge, task force to be able to provide us with the support to ensure that we haven't got a silent element of development that just doesn't seem to be coming forward, that we're tackling those proactively and bringing them forward to ensure that we're delivering and we're maintaining our 5-year housing land supply. So there is, in recent weeks, that those conversations have been ongoing, and they're moving quite quickly actually to grasp it now rather than later, because we tend to think that there are other authorities that will be wanting the same level of guidance, input or support in that. If I may, and I don't mind if we're on this point, just to follow up on the town and parish council training, that we've got an email that's come in within the last half an hour, so that was really timely. So we're still maintaining the online training. There's been a glitch over one of the sessions trees, so we're trying to resolve that and rerun it to get that online. So if you have any other themes that you think may be of particular interest for town and parish councils, do say, and we'll be prepared to run those online again. But the other thing is the email, and I feel today is good practice for this, but we're looking towards arranging 2 sessions, one afternoon and one evening session, particularly on planning as workshops. So covering planning transformation, Graham, your name's on that one. Neighbourhood planning, Section 106, and the local plan and questions and answers. So there's a couple of dates that are identified for January, and we'll start shaping those up and start making those dates public, so that we can invite the town and parish councils and be more open and active in supporting them in making representations and their global, their all-round knowledge of planning in North Northants.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I appreciate, thank you for the answer. I mean, from my point of view, after 3 years, Chair, I'm still used to committees, and I know we're not doing that anymore, and we're here to advise and help you with the EAP. But nevertheless, Chair, as an elected member, I still have great concerns on those housing numbers, on that housing delivery, because, all jokes aside, the last meeting of Rushden Working Party for the SU was April 21, and after 10 years, we're now, another 3 years on, and as I said earlier, there were deliverability numbers within that, and as I said, and Tresham wasn't part of the numbers, and I think it's just as a general member, I appreciate we're here to help you, and we're not a committee anymore, but I'm sure there's other elected members as well, the deliverability of these housing numbers, if these are going to fall away, surely we need to know sooner rather than later in relation to where we're going to have to identify other sites before we even get to the next local plan. Otherwise, we're not even going to deliver the current numbers. And I appreciate it's not cheerful, but, 3 years in, we just need to have some understanding why, and I appreciate what Simon said, and I'm sure he'll update you, Chair, but I'm sure you ought to know as well, but just why these sites have not come forward in the last 3 years since this authority has begun, because, Rushden Sue was ready to go. Tresham, there was a couple of issues, and that's just the sites I know. I mean, supply and demand, options, they were just holding back on deliverability because they don't need them.
No. But you're right, because we do need to deliver what we have to deliver to meet our 5-year housing land supply. And yes, it's not a committee, and you're here to help the executive member, blah, 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 but we're also all here to help the planners. And that's really the purpose of this particular EAP, is a dialogue between members and the planning service, so that we can be as efficient and as nimble as we can in placemaking and in all that covers. As far as the site delivery is concerned, yes, of course it's a concern. It is a concern which is well taken on board. We do need to start getting delivery of things like Corby West, things like the Rushden Sue, and I know I've had a conversation with one of the minor promoters on the Rushden Sue in the last week, but of course that's one of the minor promoters, not the more substantial part of that. But without delivery, yes, we fall behind in our housing land supply and so forth, which is a problem. But again, it is a problem reflected up and down the country. It isn't just us. And, we are so far in a better position than a lot of places. But that is not to be complacent. We can't afford not to be driving change and driving delivery. I don't know if anybody wants to touch on that, Sue.
I was just going to say, I think, we absolutely agree with what you're saying, in that we know that this is a fundamental issue for this plan, and obviously it is going to be the most fundamental question that is asked at the examination of us. We cannot go into an examination and defend a plan if we can't show that those sites are deliverable. So we're well aware of the issue, we are working on it, and the plan will need to reflect that in whatever strategy we collectively decide going forward. And it may be that we start to move away from just big sites and we go for smaller sites spread across more settlements, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about next time we see you, in terms of what the settlement hierarchy is going to look like, and how the spatial strategy evolves from our existing one. So, yeah, it's absolutely the fundamental part of the plan that we're going to have to look at.
It's going to be quite an interesting meeting, that, I suspect. And that's for everyone's calendar. that is, it's not, no,
Friday the 27th.
Friday the 27th, as ever is, yes, indeed. That should be quite an important meeting, so do make sure it's in your diaries. Okay, any more thoughts, comments, observations? Right. Well, I think we've had the usual really interesting and lively debate. Thank you, as always, Simon, for your quick introduction, which only came to an end about 5 minutes ago. No, but honestly, really good. And I think it set the context, it set the scene very much in national terms, so that's really helpful. If there are no further comments on this, we simply move to agenda item 5, which I always said...
Do we need the recommendation? Sorry.
Oh, yes, I suppose so. I've got to note the report, isn't it? Yeah, recommendations. The panel notes the contents of the proposed reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework and other changes to the planning system and provide feedback, I think we've done that, to the Council's proposed response, which is set out in Appendix A, which you will all have a copy of. Any thoughts? Yeah?
I wanted to say I continue to oppose that 10% rejection. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'll have to.
It's a consultation, so you know that's your remark. Your comment will be taken into consideration. I mean, I get it. So yeah, fine. Any other thoughts or comments? So we have the proposed response in Appendix A. Anybody who wishes to make any comments on any of those proposed responses or make any other comments themselves, Anne, you might like to put a comment yourself in, just send it to Simon or Simon, emphasising your point, because that will be picked up as a response to the consultation. But anyway, if anybody does have any other thoughts or comments, which they don't get today, just feed it back in. When's the cut-off date?
Chair, I was just going to say the deadline is it's 2 weeks yesterday, so it's the 24th at 11:45 p.m. It lodged in my mind. It's really to you, Chair, because obviously the delegation would be signed off with yourself in consultation with George. So it's just what we will do is thank really useful feedback. We'll produce a track changes version of Appendix A, Chair, so you can see how we've responded to feedback and made other changes. So it's really just the turnaround from your point of view to sign off, really, in terms of picking up any further comments.
I mean, of course, I will be signing off for Council's response.
Yeah.
But if anybody has any individual responses, they are, of course, welcome to do that by the same deadline.
Correct. It's an open consultation and anyone can respond in any capacity. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So are we happy to note the contents of Councillor North? Yes?
Well, just on that going forward, obviously I've just spent a couple of hours inputting into supporting you and everything. I just wonder at some point, is the council going to actually publish the response, or are we going to have a response appended to the minutes next time of our actual response? Because obviously with the track changes, this won't be the version that goes to the government. So
no, the final response. Yes, I'd like the final.
We'll circulate.
The final response I'd like made available to everybody on this
absolutely
panel. Okay. Right. With that, are we happy to note the contents of the report and the draft feedback in Appendix A, which will be amended, of course, by the discussion which we've just had? Do I have a mover? Do I need a mover? To note, we don't really need it. Okay. Anyone against noting that report? Oh, come on, Anne. Go on, sink my battleship.
No, I'm happy to note it after your helpful suggestion that I can
your
submit.
comment and feedback is taken into consideration.
Thank you. So sorry. Yeah.
No. Make sure you've got in there. No, but certainly, and everybody's feedback has been noted, and whether it's supportive or whether it in fact whether in fact it actually makes a point against some of the NPPF. It's it's good to see that we actually are trying to be constructive and trying to assist the NPPF be as good as it can be. Okay. Right, well, in that case, thank you very much, and that is duly noted. I now turn to the only other substantive item of the agenda, which shouldn't take us more than 2 hours, which is the Executive Forward Plan. We just have a quick glance at September, which you better get in with. There's all the various aspects there which probably don't directly affect this committee, but there are some interesting things coming up. October, do feel free to interrupt if anybody would like to. October, there's again some interesting things which will be coming. Some of which I'm responsible for, some of which I'm not, but it's some air quality supplementary planning document will be interesting. Luckily in Northamptonshire, unlike the West, we don't have any defined problems with air quality. I mean, obviously you can get them sometimes, but there's no sort of chronic problem. But it's always something to keep monitoring. Options appraisal for operations delivery at Chelveston Operating Centre from 2025 might be interesting. And of course in October we think, it's subject to God and the Planning Advisory Service, but this is of interest, that we will be having the revised peer review for the Planning Service coming back from PAS. Your colleagues will remember that the Planning Advisory Service came and had a visit just before the summer. They interviewed a number of colleagues, including members of this panel, and took their findings home and have cogitated. They've given us a draft response, some of which we agreed with, some of which we didn't completely agree with, and our responses went back. And summer's got in the way. Everybody's gone off and spent time on beaches or whatever. But we should get a final report which will be considered by executive in October. So again, that will be an interesting one. And, please come and attend. Please feel free to, come and look at it when that comes up. And then we're getting into November. Levelling up, left behind communities, transition to business as usual. That's an interesting one. December, and that is more or less it. Any thoughts or comments on the forward plan? Nope. Marvellous. Well, in that case, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'd like to thank yourselves for your wisdom and for your input. I mean, this is not just... I know the structure, Councillor North, is an executive advisory panel. I understand that. But so much of what we do is strategic and affects the whole council. So it isn't just informing the executive on a decision that they have to make. Most of the other EAPs it is. This is much more a sort of planning policy committee in a much more collegiate sense, because a lot of what we are doing is in fact going to be decisions that are made by council, not so much by the specific executive. However, it's really important that we use the combined wisdom around this table, both with yourselves members, but also with the excellent officer team we've got. So I'd like to thank all of you, Simon and Simon, Sue, Des, welcome to the machine, and Graham, of course, for keeping a fatherly eye on us all and making sure we behave ourselves, and naturally Louise, who does all the work and gets a little of the praise. So, you know, I'd like to thank everyone. A really useful session, really interesting. Hold everyone's feet to the fire. I think that's important, both in terms of the government, but also in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. And, you know, the comments that were made about, you know, delivery of the housing numbers that we've got to do are really cogent. And as I say that, a little sunbeam bursts through, isn't it nice? So thanks again, everyone. And with that, I think the meeting is closed.